In this lecture, you should be able to understand the influence of the radical changes in American modern poetry that were happening at the beginning of the century from about 1910 all the way up to about mid of the century, 1950, with some radical changes in what poems look like and greatly influenced poetry throughout the world. And Hemingway, I think it's important to understand that Hemingway started out as a poet, very concerned with poetry and what was going on with imagist poetry and what Ezra Pound was writing about in his essay called "In the Principles of Imagism." So you'll understand that, and then the influence on ultimately Hemingway's prose. We'll take a look at some examples in our time for how this was a radical change in prose style and really was suited to some of Hemingway's great goals in changing the way American literature sounded and was delivered by writers. So two things: the influence of American poetry upon Hemingway as a writer, and looking closely at what makes Hemingway's prose unique and how he took on some of the American poetic principles into his prose and then influenced writers still writing today. So let's look at something. I've as you can see, the first slide, there are 10 sort of influences from American modern poetry upon Hemingway's prose. Let's just begin with the first 3 come from Ezra Pound, a writer who helped make Hemingway famous, who helped make many modern poets famous, but who Hemingway was deeply familiar with, ironically. Pound, born in Haley, Idaho in 1893, and Ernest Hemingway spending his last moments in Ketchum, Idaho in 1963. Let's look at the first 3. So Pound wrote this essay called On Imagism in about 1914, and it said, look, poetry needs to be written in free verse. It needs to be unrhymed and have no meter. And he said poetry needs to focus on the image. The image itself should carry an idea. And then thirdly, he said that poetry should have no superfluous words, no excessive language. So those top 3 things: free verse, imagery, no excessive words. But more specifically, you get this idea of direct treatment of the thing. William Carlos Williams, who's a great descendant of Pound's influence, wrote this. He said there should be no ideas about the thing, but the thing itself. He's famous for that poem, Red Wheelbarrow. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. Clearly, there are ideas there are concepts there are profound statements about the American pastoral life and the interdependence of rain and wheelbarrows and chickens upon the sustenance of life itself. But it isn't in there, right? It's beneath the surface. It's the iceberg theory that Hemingway talked about. So direct treatment of the thing itself. No excessive words. Clearly we'll see that in American poetry. Ezra Pound's great poem, In a Station of a Metro, these apparitions of faces in a crowd, petals on a wet black bough. That's the whole poem. A metaphor, but certainly 2 strong images: the white pale faces in a subway station and white petals on a wet black bough. Despair, despondency, decay, lifelessness in the people and in the leaves. In declarative simple sense. So as opposed to, in poetry free verse, Hemingway takes that and says, all right, we're going to write in staccato, monosyllabic, 1 syllable, declarative simple sentences. And then we get tip of the iceberg from Hemingway himself. He came up with his own theory and said, look, I write 7/8 of what I'm trying to get at is beneath the surface. I give you only 1/8. And again, this concept is also understood as addition by subtraction. He adds more profundity to what he's writing by subtracting out the themes, the moral, the ideas, the principles, the concepts are all subsurface for the reader to discover, and I think more powerful because the reader discovers them and finds something new each time he or she reads Hemingway. So for Hemingway, it becomes dialogue rather than narration. You move the plot along by having real people and real conversations as opposed to a narrator moving the plot along. Associative cycling we've talked about in our time. The recurring image, dialogue, or action evokes simultaneity and ubiquity of that action. You won't see a lot of metaphors and similes in Hemingway, nor will you see a lot of adjectives and adverbs. Kill all your darlings, as D.H. Lawrence said. There'll be repetition of key words for emphasis. Nick said nothing. Krebs said nothing. Nick said nothing. And there will be a suppressed subjectivity in his writing. The who, what, when, where, why, and how of the journalist, as remember Hemingway was trained in the Kansas City Star, and so you will see what happened, where it happened, when it happened, and let the reader make the judgments as to the morality of what's happening, as to the quality of thinking and the characters that are acting. And finally, the last great influence from American poetic modernism, objective correlative, which we talked about earlier. That's a T.S. Eliot concept. That in a poem, in a modern poem, there'll be a set of objects, a situation, a chain of events, which will articulate one emotion, which will terminate in sensory experience, and one emotion is immediately evoked. And certainly Hemingway was doing that in our time in the vignettes, the shooting of the minister in the puddle, the hanging of Sam Cardinella, the bullfights, Nick being shot against the wall. So let's take a look. So another influence beyond Airs of Pounds on imagism was, I think, not coincidentally, that the Elements of Style came out. The Cornell professor William Strunk and the student E.B. White, who wrote Charlotte's Web, among many other great things, loved his professor so much, William Strunk at Cornell, that he helped publish the Elements of Style, which was a writing guide that the professor used in his writing and literature classes, and you'll find many of the elements from the Elements of Style in the community school writing guide. Well, interestingly, if you look at the 1935 Elements of Style, How to Write Well, according to the 1935 perspective of writing, there's some things that jump out, which I think reflect the enthusiasm for what Hemingway was doing. So one of the things he says, you should write with nouns and verbs. In other words, do not write with adjectives and adverbs. Be concrete. Choose the right noun, choose the right verb, that should be enough. Omit needless words as a concept, it's also in the writing guide. Use definite, specific, concrete language, also in the writing guide. Use the active voice, also in the writing guide. But look at these are all about being specific, being exact, and being terse in our development of meaning. And so Hemingway certainly took all of that in, poetic modernism and Elements of Style, and he said this, as we know from the previous lecture, in the letter to his dad. He said, "Look, I'm trying to get the actual feeling of life across. Okay, I'm trying to actually capture what is going on in reality. You got to have the good and the bad in there. If I write a story that might be hateful to your mother, the next one might be one you like exceedingly. You got to have the bad. You got to have the good. You got to directly treat the thing itself, all of it. Okay." Very quickly, because we know some of this. I found the greatest thing, he said, aside from truly knowing what you really felt rather than what you were supposed to feel and had been taught to feel, was to put down what really happened in action. I think that's an important concept for us as we are studying Hemingway's style, prose style. Separate your emotions from what you're actually seeing and write what you see, not what you are constructed and supposed to feel. And then the famous tip of the iceberg, right? I got 7/8 under the water for every part that shows. Eliminate anything, it only strengthens your iceberg, which is your story. The story really is in the part that does not show. And Indian Camp is a great example of that, right? The racism, the infidelity, the cultural destruction, the despair, the suicide, the birth, the race of the baby, all of these things we don't know. They're all beneath the surface. And they get the reader thinking it's a 7/8 churning under the water. Well, let's look at some of these principles in our time, and then we'll have a comparison with Picasso's Guernica. Let me erase that. Move this up a little bit. So, in the beginning of In Our Time, we have Nick jumping on the train to enlist in the army in Chicago. and this is one of his first experiences with violence that he's received himself, sort of a precursor to being shot. But let's look at the prose. Nick stood up. He was all right. He looked up the track at the lights of the caboose. He felt his knee. No one had ever written like that before. Monosyllabic, declarative, repetitive. The pants were torn and the skin was barked. His hands were scraped and there were sands and cinders driven up under his nails. All facts. No emotion, very few adjectives. That lousy crud of a brakeman. Come here, kid, I got something for you. And then wham, and he lit on his hands and knees beside the track. Nick rubbed his eye. One simple action in declarative, monosyllabic language. There was a big lump coming up. And so, the concept here is delayed decoding. He's giving us the details as Nick is discovering them himself. And so this is capturing reality. This is how Nick came to decoding. Sorry about that. This is how Nick came to discover that he was punched off the train by the brakeman. Okay? He feels his skin, he's barked, he's bleeding, he's got cinder under his nails, and he feels his eye, the lump's coming up. He was punched in the face by the brakeman. Simple, declarative imagery, no emotions, journalistic, omit needless words, use specific concrete language. All of this was new in Hemingway. Moving on, let's look at some of the vignettes. And so here we have the chapters, which are this long, a little bit longer, but about this length. We have this chapter of the firing squad in World War I. They shot the cabinet ministers at 6:30 in the morning against the wall of a hospital. All the shutters of the hospitals were nailed shut. Facts. Imagery. One of the ministers was sick with typhoid. They tried to hold him up against the wall, but he sat down in a puddle of water. When they fired the first volley, he was sitting down in the water with his hands on his knees. That's it. That's what happened. Okay? Remember, what I'm trying to do is tell what really happened in action, not what we're supposed to feel, not what we're constructed to feel, but what actually happened. Here we have facts, imagery. You as a reader put in the idea that the hospital doesn't want a place of healing, this place of hope, does not want to look at this hopeless situation, this place of death. You, the reader, have to put in the idea that here he is, so debilitated, he is sitting in a puddle of water and his head on his knees, and you, the reader, have to question the morality of a decision-making of the firing squad. Same with, it's not unique to World War I. You go back to America, and in chapter 15, you get they hanged Sam Cardinella at 6 in the morning. Interesting. In the corridor of the county jail. They were carrying Sam Cardinella. He'd been like that since 4 in the morning. He couldn't walk. The priests were whispering to him, "Be a man, son," said one priest. He lost control of his sphincter muscle. The guards dropped him. They were disgusted. And so here's an important idea that takes Hemingway to another level. Simple, declarative, imagery, no emotions, no adjectives, no adverbs, or very few. But you get this ambiguity. They were disgusted. Were they disgusted with the defecation of the minister in his pants? Of the alleged criminal in his pants, or were they disgusted with the situation? That this man has been so debilitated he can't control his bowels? Or were they disgusted with themselves? Again, 7/8 beneath the surface, and it's better because it is beneath the surface. Okay? Let's have a look at some bullfights. Myra lay still. He felt warm and sticky from the bleeding. Each time he felt the horn coming, then he was dead. No emotions. Facts, imagery, real action. The crowd shouted all the time and threw bread, cushions, and leather wine bottles. Finally, the bull was too tired from so much bad sticking and folded his knees. So here we have what really happened. The crowd was cheering on, bad sticking. Here we have a death. That's what it really looked like. No nobility, no angels coming down, no soul going up to heaven, death. Here we have the crowd cheering on bad sticking, cheering on excessive violence and cruelty. You as a reader put in the idea. Who are these people cheering? What was this man thinking as he was dying? The last bull, he was so tired he couldn't get the sword in. He tried 5 times, exact, specific, concrete. And the crowd was quiet because it was a good bull. He sat down in the sand and puked. Facts. Direct treatment of the thing itself. From William Carlos Williams. The ideas are carried with it. The white horse kneed himself up. The horse's entrails hung down in a blue bunch. The mono was whacking him on the back of the legs. Blood pumped regularly from beneath the horse's front legs. Imagery, imagery, imagery. Facts. You as a reader need to ask yourself, why do people applaud the innocence captured up in a bullfight? Why do they allow for the picador horse to have its guts spilled out all over the bull ring as part of the institution? And obviously the connection to war here. The innocence caught up in the machine of war. The innocence caught up in the institution of the bullfight. Let's look at a modern poem. This will help us, it's a difficult poem, but this will help us have a understanding of what's going on in modern poetry. This is a William Carlos Williams poem called The Emperor of Ice Cream. And as remember that modern perspective is a intense perception, and the absence of pleasure is often its reality. So here we have a home wake where there's a dead woman in the next room, and in the kitchen we have a man making ice cream. Call the roller of the big cigars, the muscular one, and bid him whip in kitchen cups concupiscent curds. Let the wenches dawdle and dress such dress as they are used to wear, and let the boys bring flowers in last month's newspapers. Let be finale of seam. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. Take from the dresser of deal, lacking the 3 glass knobs, that sheet on which she embroidered fantails once, and spread it so as to cover her face. If her horny feet protrude, they come to show how cold she is. And dumb, let the lamp affix its beam. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. This is 1923. This is Wallace Stevens, a high modern poet. And here we have facts. Imagery. We do have some rhyme. I know. We do have some meter here. So he was sort of caught between, romantic influence and modern influence. But this is certainly modern in its theme. So here we have this muscular cigar maker making concupiscent curds, which means lusty curds of milk, into ice cream. And the boys have been given flowers by their mothers to bring to this wake for this woman they really don't care about. And they're flirting with the girls, and they're hoping to get their ice cream. The only ruler here is not God, divine providence. It's satiating your desires, getting your ice creams, getting the girls. And then we have the brutal facts, the imagery of her blue face, her cold face, and her horny feet protrude when you cover her face to show how cold she is. No circulation, no life, no vibrancy, and dumb. She cannot speak. Let the lamp affix its beam. Let perception see what's really there. Let what is, be the end of what seems. In other words, let what is trump what seems. The only ruler on this earth is the one who makes ice cream. The one who can provide for our desires. Carpe diem, memento mori. Remember death, seize the day. It's there. A brutal, honest, declarative, real, imagistic, direct treatment of the thing itself, of a home wake. This is death. And this is what coming out of a wake or a funeral, those think about. We need to satiate our desires. So let's look at a modern painting. This is Pablo Picasso's Guernica. 1937, about Spanish. It's a painting to capture the horrors of the German and Italian bombing of a Basque town in Spain during the Spanish Civil War. And here we have bulls in multiple perspectives, women with dead babies, dead soldiers, onlookers, horrors, legs disembodied, and a lamp affixing its beam on the scene. Horses, innocents, caught up in reality, caught up in the machine of war. And so I share this with you because of what was going on in modern poetry with the free verse and direct treatment of thing, imagism, and omitting needless words. There was a radical change in what was going on in the visual arts. Here we have, on one tableau, on one painting, multiple perspectives with that bull. He's not that is not how bull's eyes look. He did not make a mistake there. One bull is looking at us, now he's looking at the other way, and he showed you both. Look at the hands of the woman, the desperation, the movement. He captures action in a single presentation. And then he has this movement across the painting. So it's a vision of the world is a single intellectual pattern. All spaces and all times are equally important and valued in Guernica. This critic goes on to say that there's no single authority, no single perspective, rather a simultaneous collage, great word, if not collision of interrelated forces, of horrors, of violence, of immorality, racism, you could argue, disconnection between men and women, men and women, men and men, men and women, fathers and sons, mothers and sons, all throughout in our time. So I like to make the argument that what's going on in Picasso's Guernica is going on in our time. We have these collages, these violent collisions of juxtaposed moments, all in the same time, given the same energy, and creating the dominant correlative emotion of despair. So I hope by the end of this you'll be able to see the influence of modern American poetry upon Hemingway's prose, and be able to articulate Hemingway's views, tip of the iceberg, an objective correlative in his painting, in his prose works, and then the influence of Picasso's art, or at least, if not an influence, at least how Picasso's art helps us understand what Hemingway is up to in this violent collage of cyclical stories in our time. And I hope to hear about this in your paper on Inner Time. Thank you.